Today we're dealing with Frederick Buechner, one of the most important figures in literary history in America and also religious history as well. Frederick Buechner, you see his dates there. He lived 96 years of life, and we're going to go right to his timeline here. He was born just kind of at the beginning of the Depression, or right before it, rather, a few years before. And notice that his family moves to a different home every year until he's 14. And so from 26 until 40, he's on the move all of his young life and adolescence, until he's 14, rather. So in 1936, when he is 10 years old, his father commits suicide and leaves a suicide note in the back of a book. I think it's Gone with the Wind. And he says in there, "I'm sorry about what I'm doing. I am no good." And this early childhood trauma will follow after Buechner all of his life, as almost all childhood traumas do for every one of us. But he deals with it in his life, in his ministry, eventually, and as a writer. His family will move to Bermuda. His family is of some means. We can use the word privilege for the Buechner family, both on his maternal and paternal sides of his lineage. And they go to Bermuda for a while. And then they spend some time in Tryon, North Carolina. He has a kind of perfunctory baptism at an Episcopal church there, which will be honored, I suppose, in his long journey. But his family is basically non-religious, meaning they don't practice, they don't go to church, they don't go to services, etc. And he will go to a prep school, very prestigious prep school, Lawrenceville School in New Jersey, where he decides he wants to be a writer. At Lawrenceville, by the way, you need to note this, he will meet a guy named James Merrill. You know, he meets somebody also who's of a status of privilege. James Merrill may not strike a note with any of you, but he was a great, great poet. He meets, Buechner in high school. They become good buddies. He calls him Jimmy, and Jimmy calls Fred Buechner Freddie. And they have a lifelong correspondence and relationship. We'll see a picture of them later on. James Merrill, is of the Merrill Lynch family, by the way, that kind of financial dynasty that benefits the Merrill family and James Merrill himself directly. He will graduate and go to Princeton, but only for about a year before his education is interrupted by service in the Army. He will serve only on stateside, only in a stateside station, I believe in Alabama. And he will not see battle experience either on land or sea. He will never be transported by air or by a ship to an outpost away from the United States. In 48, he gets his degree from Princeton. He goes back to his prep school to teach. 2 years later, he publishes a best-selling book. I mean, it just jumps off the shelves, and he will use some of that money to travel to Europe, finish his second novel, and then he resigns from the Lawrenceville position in order to become a full-time writer. He moves to Manhattan. He begins to go to a church, Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church, where George Buttrick is the preacher. He describes his voice as a kind of a thin, reedy, scratchy voice, but he captivates Buechner's attention, or he captures his attention with his captivating sermons. Buechner says that Buttrick was talking about the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, which was happening right at that time. And he said, that's a earthly coronation, but that Christ is the coronation of Christ happens in the heart of every believer among confession and tears and great laughter. And that's what he heard from the pulpit. And when he heard that, Buechner in the pew just breaks down. He just has a moment where he's cracked in two. It's his conversion experience. The next day or the next few, maybe that week, he calls up Buttrick and wants to have an audience with him, and he goes to meet him. And he says, I think that I'm supposed to be a minister. And Buttrick says, well, let's hold on there. It'd be really sad for the world to lose a great novelist only to gain a mediocre minister. Let's make sure you're on the right track here. But he takes him immediately down to Union Seminary, and he will enter there in 54 and have these giants, theological education giants, Paul Tillich, Reinhold Niebuhr. You may not know the other two names, James Muhlenberg and Robert McVie Brown, but they are also giants. He'll have a sabbatical in there, writes a third novel that receives, by the way, his second novel completely flopped. He had the sophomore jinx of a kind of less than stellar second novel. He will meet a woman named Judith Friedrich Merck. Well, look at that name, Merck. Again, privilege comes into play here. And she is part of the Merck pharmaceutical family. Anybody ever heard of the Merck manual that you can look up, both diseases and curative possibilities for addressing those diseases? Well, that's her family. He will marry her in New Jersey in 56. He'll get his ministerial degree in 58. And then he will be ordained at Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church. Presbyterians are not unusual, but this is their tradition. You don't get ordained just because, like disciples get ordained usually in their home congregation. And this is Buechner's experience, but that's not normal. Usually you are ordained in the first call to ministry to a position as pastor that you receive. And so, for example, if he was going to be a pastor at First Christian Church in Manhattan, New York, he would get ordained there. This one is a little bit different. This is more like disciples in that he's ordained at his home church for the generic vocation of evangelist for the whole Presbyterian church. He gets a position in 58 and he holds it until 67 at Phillips Exeter Academy, which is a very prestigious prep school. And he has this inglorious and less than covetable position of trying to help teenagers understand that religion is relevant. And he will eventually, though, publish a couple of books, The Magnificent Defeat and The Hungering Dark, in successive years, almost successive years. And they reflect his time there at Phillips Exeter. He will move with his family to Rupert, Vermont, and in 1967, and there he will have a family home for the rest of his days. He begins to write different kinds of books, by the way. His first book was a collection of sermons, but the first genre that he writes are novels. The second one are sermons. And then there's a third kind of genre with the Alphabet of Grace, which is theological reflection. And he does this with the Noble Lectures at Harvard. He gives the very prestigious Beecher Lectures at Yale in 1977. He begins then his fourth, he makes a foray into his fourth genre, and that is religious autobiography. And this is very important. I'm going to come back to this again and again. The Sacred Journey is the first volume of his religious autobiography. The second is Now and Then. The Telling Secrets in 91 is his third installation in that autobiography. And then 1999 is the fourth one, The Eyes of the Heart. In 1992, however, just going back to there, now let's go back to 85. In 85, Wheaton College becomes the recipient and repository for all of his manuscripts and collected papers. This is very significant. Whose papers also are there? C.S. Lewis's papers are at Wheaton College. A lot of people don't know that, but they are there. He's honored in 2006 with a gathering at the National Cathedral called The Art of the Sermon, a tribute to Frederick Beuchner. In 2014, this Buechner Institute in 2008 is not short-lived, but it's not as perduring as the Buechner Center that was established in 2014. And there's a frederickbuechner.com that is a kind of a website we'll see later on where you can get all kinds of materials. I meant to go back to 1992. Listening to Your Life, Daily Meditations with Frederick Buechner is 365 selections of his novels, his sermons, his religious or theological work, and also his religious biography. There's a meditation or a selection for every day of the year. And I believe, I'm almost certain that this is the best-selling book of his entire bibliography, his entire writing life. By the way, I have given away 100 copies of that book because I find it so inspiring and so moving in almost every page between its covers. So, and then on August the 15th, he dies at home in Rupert, Vermont. He had been spending time splitting between Florida and Vermont. I believe the Merck family may have had a kind of a winter home down on the beach in Florida. And so what is the basis of Buechner's appeal? Why is he called America's C.S. Lewis or a latter-day G.K. Chesterton? Why are almost all of his books still in print? That is, I think, except The Long Day's Dying and maybe his second novel, all of his books are still in print. It's amazing. 38 volumes that he published while he was alive. Well, he has an exquisite combination of common sense experience. He has abiding respect for salt of the earth people. He exhibits an incessant celebration of humor and the recognition of the comical. And then he has an enduring sense of the mystical. And we need to maintain a good grasp of the mystical, by the way. Almost every one of the great souls that I have presented to you prior today and also today, or even will into the future, have a grasp of the importance of the mystical, meaning those things that cannot be explained by rationality or by propositions. What was Paul's experience on the road to Damascus except a experience of the mystical? And I would defy anybody to say, how can you be a Christian except to accommodate the mystical from time to time? No, it's not necessary to have an experience of the mystical, but we need to at least allow for it. He's very quotable, Buechner is. There's perhaps no better proof of the existence of God than the way year after year he survives the way his professional friends promote him. I love that. What's lost, he says, this is a good resurrection word. What's lost is nothing to what's found, and all the death that ever was set next to life could scarcely fill a cup. He puts that in that novel that was nominated for the Pulitzer. And then in a prayer in the 60s at Exeter, Phillips Exeter Academy. He prays, Lord, catch us off guard today. Surprise us with some moment of beauty or pain, so that for at least a moment we may be startled into seeing that you are with us here in all your splendor, always and everywhere, barely hidden, beneath, beyond, within this life we breathe. The top two definitions I've already quoted to you, lust and doubt. But also he has a great definition of grace. The grace of God means something like, here is your life. You might never have been, but you are, because the party wouldn't have been complete without you. Here's the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid. I'm with you. Nothing can ever separate us. It's for you I created the universe. I love you. There's only one catch. Like any other gift, the gift of grace can be yours only if you'll reach out and take it. Maybe being able to reach out and take it is a gift too. His spirituality is founded upon these things, I believe: the sacredness of ordinary human experience. And by the way, if you haven't finished your Christmas shopping, I suggest you get on Amazon and purchase Michael Zedek, a dear friend of mine, who's come out with a book this year on the sacredness of ordinary human experience. In addition to Buechner, I'm suggesting that you get on Amazon and look up Michael Zedek, that's Zedek, Taking Miracles Seriously. It is a book that he just came out with in September, and it is a marvelous, marvelous book. Another foundation of his spirituality is his constant, ceaseless affirmation of meaning in life. Even though there's a seeming randomness to life, there's meaningfulness to be found in it. He defines resurrection. The worst thing is never the last thing, which I think is one of the best definitions ever. And then faith is a search to be known, forgiven, and healed. His spirituality also is founded on these things. His proclamation in all of his genres that all creation, including the obscene and the ridiculous, all things are redeemable. He receives comedy and laughter as blessings, as saving graces, and would urge you to do the same. He knows that doubt and certainty are two sides of faith's coin, that you cannot have one, or it's not one or the other, it's both. There's certain things that we're certain about, and there's certain things that we doubt, and that's okay. And also he has a belief always that we do more than we know, and we never know all that we do. On prayer, he really does assume that God is always present. And this is the oracle at Delphi, which was also used by Carl Jung, was printed over the doorway into his home. Vocatus atque non vocatus Deus aderit. Bidden or unbidden, invited or not invited, God is present. There's a persisting, in Buechner, there's a persisting searching that he promotes as the best way for connecting with God. Some of you remember in Luke's gospel the figure who's called the importunate widow, who keeps knocking with bloody knuckles until she gets satisfaction. Buechner on prayer, he also would suggest that you be prepared to encounter God. Expectation and anticipation are always, always good. We're in a season of anticipation right now, aren't we? That's what Advent is always about. We're preparing to encounter God in a brand new way, hopefully this Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, as we celebrate the birth of Christ. And being prepared for that is important to Buechner, and that's what prayer helps us do. And also, he suggests to listen is part of praying. Listening in the spaces and the silences. You can pray in such a way like this. You can pray inspirationally and expirationally. You could pray as you take in a breath, God is good. And then you pray, outward way, love my neighbor. Pray as you inhale, God is good. And as you exhale, you say to yourself silently or out loud, maybe even, love my neighbor. And that would be a very good way to pray. Summing up real quick, this is out of one of his novels, The Final Beast. The worst thing isn't the last thing. The worst isn't the last thing about the world. It's the next to the last thing. The last thing is the best. It's the power from on high that comes down into the world, that wells up from the rock bottom worst of the world like a hidden spring. Can you believe it? The last best thing is the laughing deep in the hearts of the saints, sometimes our hearts even. Yes, you are terribly loved and forgiven. Yes, you are healed. All is well. And another way of summing up, and this may be the best summary quote, and it is from The Alphabet of Grace, one of my favorite of his books. Next slide. If I were called upon to state in a few words the essence of everything I was trying to say, both as a novelist and as a preacher, it would be something like this. Listen to your life. See it for the fathomless mystery that it is, in the boredom and pain of it, no less than in the excitements and the gladness. Touch, taste, smell your way to the holy and hidden heart of it, because in the last analysis, all moments are key moments, and life itself is grace.